Hi. Good
Hey,
morning,
good morning
everyone.
all, or evening all, afternoon all, depending on where you are in the world. I know that there are people from all over the place.
Hello. You're all on mute, but if you want to unmute yourself and say hello, you're very welcome.
Hello.
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 Hello. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Oh,
Hello.
a box of chocolates.
Oh, Ivan is definitely the tastiest looking. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
What a good-looking bunch. But of course, it's only the good-looking ones that actually turn their cameras on. That's the secret.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Karl and Graham made an exception for me. They let me turn the camera on despite that rule.
Oh, a face made for radio,
Thank
as they
you.
say.
Morning there, Paul in Sydney.
Yes. Just across the ditch.
Excellent. Excellent. And France. Hello, Mallow. Malta.
Good morning, Steve.
G'day.
Steve, hi.
Should I let Robert Bolton in?
Costa Rica. Ooh. Only if he promises not to talk about the rugby.
All right. He will appear in just a moment. So sorry, everyone, we have to go through all this excitement here where we let everyone in and Graham, Karl and I make idle chit-chat. But we're not going to talk about the weather because it's much nicer here than it is anywhere else.
But what we can do, right, just while people are still arriving, I've got a little bit of an exercise. So we get a bit of a feel for some of the issues and some of the things that people think about when they think about Zoom meetings or any kind of meeting for that matter. So in the chat, can you please just start telling us when you think about your last Zoom meeting or a meeting that you had, what bothered you about that? What are some of the things that were actually quite annoying about the meeting? So jump in the chat and make sure when you, a person always goes off track, so we're straight into it. Fantastic. Make sure when you are posting your message, make sure you post it to everyone so that we can all see it collectively.
Yep. Not turning cameras on. Getting the tech working, not ending on time, talking on mute, annoying sounds, not wearing trousers.
Yeah.
That really bothers some people, yeah.
Waiting in breakout rooms, Zoom fatigue. Yeah, that's I find Zoom meetings really, really tiring. Sounds like I'm not the only one. Slides all the time, no interactions, yeah.
Being forced to turn on video.
Yeah. Ooh. Right background. Not enough light, boring speakers, bad sound. Barking dogs.
Uh-oh.
Natural spot to talk.
Warn my dog.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Not
we've seen a lot of technology-based problems. What are some of the other issues that turn up for you with respect to meeting online?
Now that's why we didn't want to let you in, Robert. That's the Australian national rugby team for those of you that aren't from this part of the world.
Do the Australians play rugby?
Distractions. Yeah, they're both quite good.
Harsh but fair.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm noticing is in the chat as people are suggesting things like there is no ability to have asides with adjacent colleagues. So and then there is no interaction. So lots of stuff about lack of things. So just have a think about this because we're going to use this later on in the when we work through our process. A lack of something doesn't actually exist, right? But anything after the word lack of or no is actually a solution. So the solution is finding some interaction, finding a way to have adjacent conversations. But what does that fix? What does more interaction and finding ways to have side conversations, what does paying attention actually fix?
You did, Robert. Yeah. So what Karl's driving at here is often you'll be in a meeting and someone will say the problem is we don't have enough money. So immediately that implies the solution is to get more money. What Clark's trying to get at is what's the problem that lack of money is causing. So that's when you get a whole list of lack ofs, it presupposes that people know what the solution is. So we're trying to figure out what's the real problem, what's the UDI, if you like, behind that, the undesirable effect. So the need behind the request. Yep, absolutely.
Listening skills are important. So tell me, if people have good listening skills, what does that fix for us?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of things that apply to normal meetings as well as Zoom meetings, which is just what we would expect as well.
Yes, and when we have a look at the title, how to stop shitty Zoom meetings or any other type of shitty meetings. But Zoom has a particular type of challenge, and a lot of it is to do with the ability to interact with each other. And it has a lot to do with how people actually behave. So when you think about Zoom meetings, what are some of the things, what are some of the way that people behave that cause you to be a bit bothered? I mean, I heard somebody say the other day, in fact, I remember thinking it myself, like people eating during the meeting in a Zoom meeting. That was for some people. It's like, what's that about? Yeah, and it's about a particular behaviour. People turning video on or turning video off. That is another type of behaviour. What are some of the other behaviours that show up in specifically in a Zoom meeting, but in general in meetings? False presumption that the meeting is an orchestrated conference. Interesting.
I like
drinking.
That.
Question mark. Was that an obstacle or a solution, Steve?
Obviously a solution.
Smoking, inhaling like Darth Vader. Yep. Awesome. Really good list of stuff. Visual communication is important. Nice, nice. Look, one of the things that I did before this webinar is I actually reached out to LinkedIn and I said, what bothers you about meetings? What are some of the things that really upset you about meetings, whether they're on Zoom or in a room? And so, crappy backgrounds is another one. Interesting. So I asked that question of LinkedIn, and I've got a list of stuff I'm going to show you at the end, because I think we should take some of the stuff that you're talking about and actually add it to that list. Tinny audio, body language. Yep. Awesome. Finishing on time, starting on time with everyone. Wearing headsets all day. Yep, I can imagine that would be challenging. Okay, so we've got it. We're starting to get quite a good list. So I think we might actually move on, because I'm also conscious that we've got an hour and we've just had a bit of a 10-minute warm up. So Graham, I will just go through the agenda and then I'll get you to do some introductions. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to do some introductions to Clark, Graham and myself in a minute. Then this is the list of stuff that we're going to go through. Now, it looks like a lot, but actually these ones here, right down to here, there's actually only 6 slides. And I'm only going to touch on them very, very lightly, because that stuff is more about kind of the theory of group dynamics and how people operate. And there's plenty of information and knowledge on the internet around that. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to focus in here on a process that is useful for setting up ground rules that actually helps people in these kind of environments. Now that, again, it can be in a room or in Zoom. And then to finish off, just a couple of ideas that you can use and some things to think about in terms of what your next steps might be. So Graham, I'll hand over to you in terms of just a bit of introduction.
Okay, so I think probably Clark is the reason that we're all here. He's obviously written a couple of books. He's taken the agile process and added TOC to it. I've taken my knowledge as an accountant and finance expert, added TOC to it. And Karl is a trained psychologist who's used TOC. And the way we're sort of thinking about it is agile finance people, it's like we've got a big gun to point at problems. What TOC has done for us is allow us to focus. It's like the laser sight on top of the gun, so it's most effective. And I know Steve Tendon is another who's added TOC to Kanban to make sure that he's hitting the constraint, the bottleneck, the spot where this gun is going to do the most damage. So really excited that that we've got Karl talking about this stuff. The way he uses TOC is several different levels. He uses it on individuals to help them find their blind spots and their constraints. If you're being too competitive, too perfectionistic, these sort of things, he uses TOC to help uncover that. He also uses it to get teams working together better, and also at an organizational level. And he's in the middle of writing a book at the moment on how he uses some of this stuff. And we can't wait for the book to come out. There's too much valuable stuff. So Clark and I have twisted his arm up behind his back so that he would share some of it today. Now, if you can imagine a situation where you've got a room full of people, and on one side of the room is an organization that's drastically trying to save money, and on the other side of the room, you've got a whole load of union representatives who are trying to squeeze as much money out of the company as they possibly can. Karl uses these techniques to make sure they're playing nicely and come up with a good solution. So I'm excited to see how he does this again. And yeah, over to you, Karl.
Cool, thanks, Graham. So I mentioned before in the agenda that I'm just going to touch on a few theoretical things in terms of group dynamics, and then I'm going to show you how I have been using TOC and kind of a combination of some TOC tools. One of them is called a prerequisites tree, and another is called a current reality tree. So a combination of those tools to come up with a process that I personally have found to be really, really effective when we start with any kind of meeting, and including on Zoom. In fact, it's actually easier on Zoom because we can get more people interacting. So I'm going to get straight into it, group problem solving, and I am going to go pretty quick because I am conscious of time. I want to add a lot of value, but just remember this webinar is being recorded, and Clark will make sure that you get access to it and a link to it so you can have a look at it. So group problem solving, first of all, it's all about trying to have effective meetings. And there are three things that we should think about when if we want to have an effective meeting. And the first is we need to obviously have the right competence, knowledge, and experience in the room. Because if you don't have that, then it's very likely that your solution is not going to be robust enough. And so your meeting is actually going to be missing something. This is collective problem solving. I know that there's a lot of people that are watching this webinar who are really, really proficient in problem solving processes. This is specifically about collective problem solving processes. And it was one I know that Clark has quite a bit of experience in because he uses Agile a lot, and Agile thinking and problem solving processes. There's some really cool ones. There's actually one called Three Little Pigs exercise I heard about the other day, which I thought was a very, very clever way of actually bringing people together and collective problem solving. So competence, knowledge and experience and collective problem solving processes, and there's heaps of them. My particular preference is TOC, but there's lots of different options there. The third thing, and this is a really important one, is actually constructive interpersonal behavior. Now, this is actually even more important on Zoom than in a room, because in a room it's obvious. But when you're on Zoom, you actually have to work a little bit harder to try and get constructive interpersonal behavior. So if we get those three things right, then the probability of having a highly effective meeting is going to increase quite significantly. But there's a little bit more to it, and that is a team of people or a meeting is usually in order to make some kind of decision. So we need to explore decision making. In order for a decision to be effective, there are actually two things that are necessary. Now, I'm going to ask a quick question. This is a little a brain teaser. 14 frogs sitting on a log, 4 decide to jump off. How many frogs are left sitting on the log? Jump in the chat and put in what you think the answer is. While you're thinking about it, 0, 14 is another one, 14 is another one. Yep. 14. Oh, I love all these 14s. Can anybody who says 14, why are they saying 14?
A decision is not action.
Perfect. Absolutely. That's exactly right. They only decided. They didn't take any action. Nice. So in order for a decision to be effective, there are two things. One is we need a quality solution. That seems pretty obvious, but that's actually multiplied by acceptance of the solution. Because without acceptance of the solution, it is unlikely that people are going to take action on it. And in particular, acceptance by those who must implement the decision. That's quite important. So when we think about group decision-making, effective decision-making, we can put all those together. Here are the things that are necessary for a really, really effective meeting. Competence, knowledge, and experience. And you know, the great thing about Zoom is that actually we have more access to the competence, knowledge, and experience because we can reach across the world now globally far more effectively than we could before. Constructive interpersonal behavior, really, really important. Some kind of collective problem solving process. Quality of the solution often comes from the 3 above that. And then of course, acceptance of the solution. If we want to dig really deep into that, we would need to start exploring things like democratic decision-making, consensus decision-making, and autocratic decision-making. So there's a lot more underneath that particular one, but I just wanted to touch on the main points for today. So in order to do that, here's some things that we need to think about or do. 1, we need to choose the right people or at least have access to them. 2, we need to create some kind of ground rule to help with their constructive interpersonal behavior. And 3, we need to follow a process to make decisions that lead to ownership of the actions so that, or ownership of the solution so that there are actions that take place. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus on ground rules, and I'm going to show you a process which is actually a thinking process applied to developing a set of ground rules. Now, when you do that, you actually set up your meeting because you actually start getting into a problem-solving process. You start creating a set of ground rules, which helps the interpersonal behavior. So it's kind of like a win-win. And if you wrap those two things, process around ground rules, around people who are really smart, then you're going to have far, far better meetings. Right. So why focus on ground rules, though, specifically? And I love this analogy. It's the iceberg analogy. Look, traditionally, most people have just focused on competence, knowledge, and experience. You can usually demonstrate that by holding up a certificate or a degree or some other kind of acknowledgement for the experience, knowledge, and competence that you have gained. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. and that's usually what the bits that you can see. But underneath that is collective problem solving processes. So in a team environment, if you have collective problem solving, it's kind of sits underneath, and there's a process that goes on, then it really helps in terms of a bigger picture in terms of the group. But the last part is the constructive interpersonal behavior. And that constructive interpersonal behavior, which we get by creating ground rules, is actually the base of the iceberg. And you know the funny thing about the base of an iceberg? That's where the stability is. That weight at the bottom of the iceberg is the thing that holds it stable. So keep that in your mind when we're thinking about ground rules. So we need to do the whole thing. We need to look at the team as the whole iceberg, but I'm going to start by actually talking about what's right at that very base. But there's also quite an important reason why we should do this. Because if you look at team performance over time, and you can see the graph that we've got here, I'm going to tell you a little story first, right? So an operations manager, a finance manager, and an HR manager walk into a room. And they walk into a room and they have to try and sort out some problem. They're all very highly experienced, very competent, highly knowledgeable, but they have no problem-solving process and they have no ground rules. Very, very quickly, what you will find is that the team performance takes a dive, a massive dive. Now, if we were to introduce problem-solving process, then over time, that's actually going to do, that's going to improve the performance of the 3 experts. And so by improving so we get problem solving and competence, which is excellent. But if we go one step further and we actually introduce ground rules, we start to get synergy between people with expertise and knowledge and experience. And that's when you start to get self-development, self-developing teams. Now, obviously, that takes work, it takes effort, it takes practice. But you can see over time, actually, you get a much different level of performance. So the difference, for example, the performance gap, just the difference between somebody who focuses on competence, knowledge, and experience and puts some problem solving is quite significant. If you add ground rules to it, the performance goes up again. And look at the difference between taking just a straight competency-based approach and then adding the other 2 conditions. Massive, massive shift in terms of performance. Now, from leadership,
just to be clear on this, Karl, what you're saying is those people going into the room are most likely going to have their own agenda, the own thing that they're looking at. There's a real chance there's going to be competitive behavior, everyone guarding their own patch, and it's that's causing the decay in the team performance. Yeah.
And I see that a lot. You get room, like a room of people, all with specialized expertise and knowledge and experience. And without process and without ground rules, it soon disintegrates. It soon starts, and it takes a very, very long time. Now that happens both in the room and on Zoom. And if you could just take that conflict and away, and then you actually start to create an environment where there's far more innovation. I noticed in the chat that somebody said, is competence really that important? Well, actually, yes, it is. You do need the knowledge and the experience and the skill in the room. And if you can't get it in the room, you at least have to have access to it. But you need those other 2 things as well. Okay, so another little test though here, because we talked about acceptance, and quite often a group will come together and when we'll talk about setting up a set of ground rules. But there's this thing that goes on. Some go, well, why don't we just use the ground rules from this other team? Versus, well, why don't we create our own ground rules? So what I'd like to know in the chat, what would be the benefit of using somebody else's ground rules? Save time. Perfect. Yeah. Save time. That's enough. That's enough. There's probably other benefits. It's faster if you use other people's ground rules. Okay. What is the benefit of creating your own? Oh, buy-in, says Robert. What's the benefit of creating your own ground rules? Use the experience for the group. Get buy-in. It's customized for purpose. It's adapted. So how would we summarize that? It's adaptive, it's specific, it's owned by the team. Awesome. We've actually talked about this already. Ownership. Ownership of the solution. My handwriting is terrible. I'm trying to write on the side. But ownership. Ownership of the ground rules. Ground rules are actually a solution to take care of behavior. So ownership of the solution is actually really important if you want people to take action on it. Of course, if we have ownership and we save time, then we end up with a great set of ground rules. So the question then is, how can we get a set of ground rules really fast and save time? I'm going to show you a process for doing exactly that. Right, new ground rules, a process for less shitty meetings, whether you're in a room or on Zoom. And so, new ground rules process. This is the process that I use, and I've had great experience with it in terms of the results that I've been getting from people. So first of all, some of you will recognize this process. Any of you into TOC, if you recognize a thing called a prerequisite tree, you'll probably be reasonably familiar with this particular process. First of all, clarify the goal. Right, so in this case, we want to have a great, or at least a less shitty, meeting. That's what we want to do, right? Next is identify the obstacles to having a great meeting. Now, in the beginning, when I was asking questions, and we were saying, so what are some of the things that really bother you about Zoom meetings or meetings in the room? Some people said, oh, there is not this, a lack of this, right? So really important when we start thinking about what are the obstacles, we actually are specific about the obstacles. It's like, what can I see? What can I see? Or if you say there's a lack of trust, because obviously trust is a solution, then what would that fix? If we had more trust, what would the obstacle be? Step 3, develop some options to overcome the obstacles, and we're going to have a go at that. And then craft a solution, which we can actually create a set of ground rules out of that. So this is the process I've been using. Let's have a go at it. Now, just to get started into it, I did, as I said earlier, I asked LinkedIn, what is stopping you having great meetings? And this is the list that people came up with. So have a quick read. Okay. Can anybody, there's a difference between the two lists. Can anybody see the difference? The list on the left and the list on the right relates to different problems. So Rodney says, the lack of preparation is one I really don't like. Yeah, actually, most people don't like most of these. No clear purpose. Well, so no clear purpose. The solution is have a clear purpose. What would that fix? Left is behavior. Nice spotting.
Yeah,
absolutely right. The left-hand side are actually behavioral things. The right-hand side then, what's the right-hand side about? Goals, yep. Leadership, Process. Steve Pug said process, absolutely right. It's about the process that we use. Now, if you then have a set of ground rules and you have a robust collective problem-solving process, we could take care of most of those undesirable effects. What is missing though? What is missing, apart from some of the things that we talked about earlier? Technology, yep. So technology actually, if we want a really effective meeting, we have to fix all of these, and we have to do it inside Zoom technology or any other form of technology. And that's part of the challenge. So we're going to have a bit of a go at this. It's a bit of a jump into the unknown, because we're actually going to do some problem solving right here with all of the people through chat. And I'm going to do it by bringing up that list of problems. So can everybody see that okay? Highly effective Zoom meeting, some of the obstacles, one, for example, talking over each other. Can everybody see that all right? Just let me know in the chat. Yep, great. So what options do we have for overcoming talking over each other? And your statement has to read, we have. It starts with we have. Anybody got some ideas? We have an option to raise a hand. Excellent. What other options might there be for talking over each other? We put ourselves on mute.
We have a moderator came up.
Oh, we have a moderator. Perfect. We have a moderator. Graham, if you could just keep reading those out, I will do my best to type effectively.
We have a process to order people speaking.
To order people's speaking.
We have an agenda.
We have an agenda.
Gee, I think your handwriting is better than your typing, Karl.
Thanks for that. Hang on. We have an agenda. Yeah, I'm not great on the typing. Okay, that's a good start. No, we have different ends in mind. What could we do to overcome that? We have an agenda. Okay, so that turns up again. What else could we do?
A common goal.
A common goal. Would that be like our common goal is to have a highly effective meeting? What other options?
Could be. Hang on, we have an objective at the outset of the meeting.
We have an objective at the outset. Perfect. Anything else?
There's a few that sound like we have a meeting to decide what we're going to have a meeting about.
Right. Okay. We have pre-meetings. Well, actually, sometimes, hang on.
Yeah.
We have pre-meetings. Look, when I meet with a group, like if it's a high stakes meeting, if it's a really high stakes meeting and you've got multiple subject matter experts in a room and you're trying to come up with a solution to a problem that's costing millions and millions of dollars or pounds, then absolutely a few pre-meetings is actually well worth doing. And in particular with the people who are the leaders in the perhaps different departments. So the pre-meeting and setting up the meeting for a good session, absolutely. Let's keep moving along because like we're only getting a bit of a taster here. Blaming, how do we overcome blaming? What options do we have? We have nobody has any ideas about how to overcome blaming? We have call
it out as poor behavior.
We have called out poor behavior. Okay, in order to do that, if you want to call out poor behavior, you actually need to recognize and probably have some language around what is poor behavior and what is good behavior. But nice, I like it. We have called out poor behavior. What else have we got? We have ground rules, somebody just said. That's interesting. We have ground rules, the solution within a solution. So more importantly, perhaps we follow our ground rules. All right. Okay, being defensive. How do we overcome being defensive? We have a rule of never blaming a person. Now that's actually one that comes up a lot. Have you ever heard the phrase, don't play the man, play the ball? Or don't play the person, play the ball? Okay, being defensive. What other options do we have for overcoming being defensive? We have psychological safety. Yes, that would be that's a really, really big term. What are some of the things that we might do as an action to create psychological safety? We have psychological safety training.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, because the groundwork of what makes an effective team is actually a really, really important part for groups of people to understand. So if you go and have a look back at some of my slides, and if you use those slides as a starting point to have a conversation with people, here's what makes a really effective group. And so that is the training for being an effective group. Now, we're going to create some ground rules that we own so that we can ensure that we are really effective. We have encouraged participation. What sort of options do we have to encourage participation on Zoom? Voting, chat,
Breakout rooms, yeah.
breakout rooms. We do actually have voice. Polling. Now you might see, so you've seen a lot of polling. Yep, so there's a stronger leadership guidance. Okay, let's talk about distraction. Really important one, especially on Zoom. What options do we have to overcome distractions on Zoom? We have, I think it relates to this, airplane mode. Yep. What other ways? We have announced a new website URL before it's published. Yep. Yeah, we probably should have said that right at the very beginning. We have a single screen. The website www.toc.plus is new. It's coming soon.
Actually live now, Karl. I've just been distracted setting it up for the last 10 minutes.
Okay.
A live example.
So
yeah.
we have a way to stop people getting distracted and doing other things when they should be concentrating on the meeting, Karl?
Okay,
Clark?
so what?
Yes, indeed.
What ways? Yes. What options do we have for that, Graham? What options do we have for helping people not be distracted?
Cut people's fingers off.
We cut people's fingers off. I'm not going to put that up as a ground rule.
I think we need an agreed set of rules. I know some people think better when they're walking around. Others find that offensive. We've had the can we drink, can we eat during Zoom meetings? Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of these things, it's just agreeing between you what's acceptable behavior.
I love that one. We have a show your hands rule. But there's so many different things that we can do. I mean, look at all of the great ideas that have flowed, and we've only hit 1, 2, 3, 4 obstacles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 obstacles. I'm going to go down to the bottom. Decisions going down rabbit holes, right? Because these are the more process orientated ones. How do we avoid going down rabbit holes? We have a facilitator. Nice. We have a parking lot. We have a definition of rabbit holes. Excellent. We'll have to pick that up
sorry,
later.
that's someone asking what a rabbit hole is.
Yep.
What we mean by a rabbit hole is when you've got a discussion going along and we get sidetracked and go off piste, we go down off another topic that's not really related, or we dig down in far too much detail to something and it becomes a distraction from the main purpose of the meeting. Hope that's clear.
Yeah, and I've just added
Thanks,
a couple
Marlo.
of others. We have referred to the purpose and we have used the agenda. Nice. Okay. Decisions with specific rabbit hunting meetings. Oh, I love that. We have rabbit hunting meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. What about agreeing to disagree?
That makes sense, John.
The rabbit hole analogy comes from Alice in Wonderland. Memory serves me right. Nice. Yeah. We don't want our meetings to be like Alice in Wonderland. Although we do want to create situations sometimes where we get a bit innovative and we look at more magical things. So maybe rabbit hunting meetings would be a really good solution to that. Agreeing to disagree. Yeah, well, so when we agree to disagree, we actually don't do anything. How could we overcome that? Remember, this is about process. We have a vote. That is an option. What other options do we have? The funny thing about voting is that it is actually, what you end up with is potentially a whole bunch of people who don't agree and then a whole bunch of people that do agree. But the people that don't agree won't take any action. And then the people that do agree will go, why aren't those people taking any action? Well, it's because there's no ownership. We have actions as an element of the agenda. We have agreed a common goal. We've got that one first. We find a win-win solution. We find win-win solutions. So just on the win-win solutions, one of the processes I like to use is a thing called interest-based problem solving, which actually comes from a book called Getting to Yes. Now, interest-based problem solving is quite clever because it has the word interests at the front of it. So there's collective problem solving, but the word interests is the key. And if you can find the interests, not the positions or the solutions that people have, but the interests or the needs that they have, then the probability of finding a solution that is a win-win that you can reach consensus on is much, much higher in terms of its probability. Group thinking is an obstacle. Nice, we could actually add that to the bottom here. Group think. Let me ask, if we have options to raise our hand, we have ourselves on mute, we have a moderator, we have a process to order people speaking, we have an agenda, we have common goal, we have an objective at the outset, we have pre-meetings, we've called out poor behavior, we have ground rules and we follow our ground rules. We have a voting, chat, breakout rooms, voice, polling, leadership. We have airplane mode, we have single screens, we have a headset, we have physical breaks. We have a show of hand rule. We have a facilitator, a parking lot, definitions. We refer to our purpose. We use the agenda. We have rabbit hunting meetings prior to coming together. We have a vote, and we find win-win solutions. Is the probability of your meeting going to go from shitty to less shitty? So the technology, yes, is a problem, but actually what we should really be focusing on is how do we behave when we use the technology? What processes do we use when we use the technology? And how do we make sure that we've got people together with the competence and the knowledge? And so that is how, and so there, we could go through, spend another 10, 15 minutes on this, but if we were to take all of those things and group them into, say, 7 principles, all of those ideas, and group them into 7 principles, we would probably have a pretty robust set of ground rules. If we spent just a little bit longer doing it, we would probably end up with an incredibly robust set of ground rules that would really, really keep us on track.
Or a book.
What a weirdly specific number. Which one was that? 7? 7 just seems to be an easy one for people to remember, because here's another little tip. Once you have crafted your ground rules, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take you back. So that's an example. And now you've had the experience of the process that I use when creating ground rules. And it was actually a process of problem solving. I'm going to take you back to that, which helps groups of people with heaps of smart knowledge come together and collaborate. And that's how you go from shitty meetings to better meetings. Now, over time, with practice, it gets better and better and faster and faster. We've already seen that graph, right? If you use ground rules, a process, and you get the right people, it goes faster and faster. You know, it's funny because Clark, Graham, and myself, we started working together on Zoom. We haven't actually physically been in the same room since we met. Well, since we actually met together virtually. We haven't actually been in the same room. But we've been getting faster and faster. Every week we come together and we work and we collaborate on stuff, and we're getting faster and faster and coming up with more and more innovation all the time. And so we're actually applying this stuff to ourselves.
Can I also add here, Karl, there's just something to add here, is that some of you are regulars here, and you hopefully you've seen that we're also getting better at running these little webinars. And we're kind of fine tuning that, because you learn as you go. And so hopefully it is actually getting better and better. What Karl's saying is that it can actually get even betterer if you deliberately try to make it better by problem solving.
Yeah. So just a reminder, here's the process that we just used. Clarify the goal. So we're coming together in a meeting. This is an intermediate step to before we go problem solving. Our goal is to have a great meeting. Identify the obstacles to have a great meeting. And you know what? I guarantee that your people on Zoom or your people in the room will be able to come up with problems pretty quickly if you gave them a forum to do so. You guys did it. You guys and girls absolutely nailed it in terms of all the problems. We haven't covered everything except that this is a short time frame, and this is a webinar to help you think about this process. So we identified the obstacles. Then we came up with a whole stack of options. And notice I wrote down all the options that I heard about. I could have written more down, and we could have spent more time actually exploring options. And then when you take all of those options and you bring them together, you can craft a solution out of that. And the way I like to do that is I like to chunk those up. So I take those ideas and chunk them up. And then that's how you come up with a really powerful set of ground rules. Now, there was a few people who said, well, and if we follow the ground rules and we follow the process that's on the agenda, then our meetings will be far more effective. And that is absolutely right. And that's my experience of working through and using this process. So we went using,
Quick question for you. I have a concern, because I've quite often seen people set up ground rules and stuff, and then they ignore them. So that's another obstacle there.
Then they ignore them.
Yeah, people set all these things up and they have really good intentions, and then they kind of ignore them. So there's something about implementing them there.
Yeah. So one of the tricks that I use for implementation is that once a team, so especially if a team is going to be coming together regularly, if they're solving a big problem, it's likely you're not going to solve it in one session. Because I tend to deal with groups that are dealing with high stakes problems. So when you have high stakes problems, you usually have several meetings, which actually means it needs to be even more structured. But with high stakes meetings, and if you want to try and develop and build your team, a really clever trick is once they've got their set of ground rules, at the beginning of every meeting, you get the ground rules out and you say, right, we're going to go around the room and I want each person to pick a ground rule, tell us why it's important, and then be responsible for that ground rule for the rest of the day. And if the whole team goes around and picks a ground rule, and then explains why it's important, and then starts the day and they police that ground rule. Now, there's a funny thing that happens. The culture or the behavior in the team will start to change, because the more people that call the ground rules, and and here's a clue. If you're getting stuck, everybody knows what a stuck meeting looks like. Actually, if you're getting stuck, It's because this is turning up. If this is turning up, you are stuck. And it's a shitty meeting, right? You want to get unstuck? Great. Go use some ground rules. Bring the ground rules out and say, why are we getting stuck? One, do we have the right knowledge and competence in the room? Because if we don't, then that might be the reason we're getting stuck. Let's go and get the knowledge we need. Two, are we following our collective process and our agenda? No, we're not. Okay, that could be the problem the reason we're getting stuck. Three, are we treating each other with respect, and is the interpersonal behavior really constructive? No, it isn't. That might be why we're getting stuck. Okay, right. So now we know how to get unstuck. And look, when you first start, it's going to happen. When you first start out as a meeting coming together collectively, it's going to be a bit disjointed. Over time, it gets better and better until you become so proficient, you actually become almost a self-developing team. Now, from a leadership perspective, you want to be thinking about that, because if you lead a team based on competency, it's going to take you a lot of effort and a lot of energy to maintain any level of performance. If you lead a team based on the competency and with some level of problem-solving approach, then it's going to be easier, but it's still going to take a fair bit of effort. If you lead a team that gets really proficient with ground rules, a collective problem-solving process, and knows how to go and get the competence and knowledge that they need, they will actually become self-developing. And from a leadership perspective, that will allow you to trust them and for them to be free to actually evolve and develop new and innovative stuff. Now, here's a little snippet, which is much bigger than the scope of this webinar. The more teams that do that in the organization, the faster the culture will change from a defensive security-based culture to a constructive-based culture. And a constructive-based culture is one that's really affiliative and collaborative, where people learn with and by each other, where people can bring their own stuff and actually become more and more self-actualized in terms of what they can bring to the organization, and where there is much higher levels of achievement. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant. It's something that I'm really passionate about. So new ground rules, this new ground rules process is actually a really, really clever way of doing something very, very practical that actually starts to shift the culture of an organization. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, right? The starting point is try this out on your team, try it out on your next Zoom meeting, and see if your meeting is a little less shitty. And look, that's the goal, right? The meeting is a little less shitty than the last one. It doesn't have to be perfect, just a little less shitty. I'm really conscious of time. We've talked about that. That was my working notes. Look, when you go back to work, first of all, Clark's going to send out a link to this free webinar recording. It is recording, so feel free to jump in there and have a look at that. If you want to learn more about this approach or learn more about how I work, then you can go to yourthinkingcoach.com. That one is live, and there's heaps of stuff on it. And I'll probably take some of that stuff and go and put it on toc.plus. We will be putting up the webinar slides, a transcript, and also I'm going to create a situation where we can have a bit of a discussion forum if you want to ask questions. That will be available in a few days. It is available for pre-order now. It is a paid option, so it's up to you whether or not you think that would be of value to you, but certainly check out the free recording first. The book that I'm writing, New Ground Rules, Unlocking High Performance Teams in the Room and on Zoom. I've basically just taken you through many of the chapters. I don't know how long this is going to take me to write. And I thought it was a bit premature for Clark and Graham to say, well, that's great. What an awesome looking book. Do a webinar. So I'm probably going to take the transcript, and that's probably going to start helping me bring together the chapters. If you're interested in getting on the list for that when I do finally get to publish it, you'll find the link there. If you're interested in a facilitator ground rules workshop, then I can do that. I can do it online, and I can do it face-to-face. And of course, I do professional meeting facilitation for when those sessions that are really high stakes, where there's incredible amounts of value. Those are the projects that I like to work on the most. When you've got high value, high stakes meetings, and actually you need some kind of facilitation around it. So, so that's it. We've got about 5 minutes for questions, which we can do in the chat. But what I'd also ask you to do, just as we wrap up this webinar, is just pick one highlight or one insight that you got from this session. Just one highlight and one insight that you got from this session, and drop it in the chat for us. If you've got a question, fire the question in there. I'll see if I can answer it for you right now.
So, Karl, what you've shared with us today is, some of the experience you've had. And when you talk about high stakes meetings, some of the companies you've worked with, if their people go on strike, that costs them £20 million a day, doesn't it?
Yeah, 44 million.
44 million pounds a day. So we're getting an insight into some pretty powerful stuff. And it seems to me that you're perhaps using TOC in two ways here. It feels like often we go into a meeting and as individuals, we assume that everyone is working to the same ground rules as us. So we never bother to dig it out. And in actual fact, you've identified the not having common ground rules as being a real constraint towards effective meetings. And you've also used a TOC methodology so that you can get common ground rules really quickly without it taking a lot of time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the thing about Zoom is that those things become even more important to focus on, and you have to think a little bit more about them. And so that's why there's actually a lot of fatigue. Apart from the fact that we can't physically connect with each other, we actually haven't learned how to behave effectively and how to use collective problem-solving processes. If we do that, we can actually wrap those things around really competent people. And that is actually where we can, so it's almost like global collaboration now. So that's the value of it. And like there was a Nigel Latters, a New Zealand psychologist, done a documentary really recently in New Zealand about the differences between Zoom and in the room. I haven't actually watched it. I just saw the short story and I thought, hey, that's really cool. Check that out. And he said, yes, there is definitely a difference between the two things. And we have to acknowledge that it is different, but we still want to be able to improve our Zoom meetings. And a starting point has to be the fundamentals. Once we look at the fundamentals, just like we did when we were looking through our options, then we say, how do we use technology to meet those needs? How do we use technology to meet the ground rules? How do we use technology to make sure that we've got the rational thinking processes? In our last webinar, I remember Professor, sorry, yep.
So I'm just giving you a 1 minute warning.
Thank you.
One of the things that came through is people hate meetings that run over time.
So I've got about a minute.
And then
I'm getting a nod.
Roll over. Do you want to carry questions over? But just say basically we're wrapped up and you can have a bit of a natter. Is that okay?
Yeah. So I just want to give one more snippet to hit the 10:30 mark, and then we'll close. But I'm happy to hang out a little bit longer, but that will mean the end of this session. Professor Vicky Mabin, in the last session that we had, she talked about the fact that being online enables actually multiple people to put their ideas in at the same time. So you can actually accelerate it because it's not, you can accelerate problem solving because it's not, we don't have to wait for each other. We can actually do brain dumps much faster, and that'll close it. We can do brain dumps much faster on Zoom.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Karl. And just last thing, if anyone hasn't checked out Clark's article on 5G on the Nokia.com website. We're looking into Clark's crystal ball, which is often a fairly scary place to go, but he's written some interesting stuff, and we'll watch how it all plays out. Thanks very much for coming, everyone, and we'll stay online for a while to answer some questions and possibly go down a few rabbit holes. Otherwise, we'll see you all next time. Thanks very much.
Quickly, toc.plus is actually live now, just in case you didn't.
Oh, awesome.
It's actually live through the miracle of clicking.
I love, somebody just made a comment. I love how you didn't give us actually a set of specific ground rules. You gave us a process for creating a set of ground rules that will work for us. That was me paraphrasing. That's right. Yeah. It should be customized for every group so that they own it and so that they actually take action on it. That's 100% important, and it's especially important on Zoom.
And the time that a group spends putting together those ground rules, you'll get back in spades. Your return on time investment will be huge. Yeah.
So remember that graph. If it's just competence, you take a dive. If it's competence and problem solving, then you will be stable. But if you put ground rules in there, you'll actually have self-developing teams eventually. But it takes time.
Can I pick up a question here? It's actually a comment from John Ricketts, and I think John clicked off, so I'll read it out. It's an observation from experience. I think it'll probably resonate with a lot of you. Some people think before they talk, others talk to discover what they think. So like I'm the talk and go, well, that sounds interesting sort of person. And a good moderator encourages the former and limits the latter. I think this chat thing, just bouncing off that, the ability to chat kind of levels that out a bit, and it makes it easier, because I love thinking with my fingertips and then pressing enter, and that kind of works with introverts and extroverts quite well, I think.
Yeah, and so one of the things to think about, I guess, in a group meeting is that if you're facilitating a meeting like I did with this session, it's really, especially on Zoom, it's really powerful to have a couple of colleagues who are actually monitoring the chat and making sure that some of the hygiene factors are being taken care of in the Zoom session. That's actually really important. So that's another thing that you could add to the tips for running good Zoom meetings, is actually have somebody who is there to be able to help us keep the hygiene factors in terms of the technology sorted. We could have gone a little bit deeper, perhaps, in terms of the specific technology, but I wanted to stay away. As I said previously, I wanted to stay away from the technology. There's heaps of stuff on the technology side in terms of how to do it. But when it comes to ground rules and when it comes to thinking processes, there's less of that.
Actually, maybe setting up roles is an interesting thing too. So we agree here up front. Like Karl's the entertainment today, the entertainment. He provides the content, the thinking, and all that kind of stuff. And then he actually has to perform when he's here. And that's actually really, really hard work. So we have Graham as a host today. Graham is hosting you all, bringing you all in. And I'm in the background clicking admit, and so on. So we mix that up because they require different things, and it would just ruin Karl's experience and your experience if he had to try and do everything. It's really hard. So different roles is really helpful.
Indeed.
Any other questions? Anyone would like to turn their microphone on and say, you're very welcome. Otherwise,
I'd just like to have there's a couple of names that I can see. I've had a conversation with Philip Oakley recently. So Phil, nice to see you here. I've enjoyed our chat. And Steve Tenen, we've had a couple of great conversations as well. So it's amazing how Zoom has enabled us to connect with each other. So I've really enjoyed, so Zoom and LinkedIn and social media, really enjoyed the conversations that we've been having.
Oh, actually, and Ian, that's a really good point in Maine about adding Miro or mural, or like you just did there, MindMeister, just something that you look and work together. Google Docs is actually surprisingly good if you want to collaboratively type up a bunch of obstacles as well.
Yeah, I'm
Can I
looking
just
forward
add
to
to
getting
that?
more proficient with Miro.
Clark, one technique which is really useful in Miro is with breakout rooms. It's like the 248 liberating structures where you put people in a breakout room in Zoom, but then you also give them their own little space in Miro to work together, and it's duplicated for how many breakout rooms you have, so they can work in that area and then come to conclusions and then
It's really
come back together.
That's very cool.
Then
Very
we should
cool.
write a book on that, Ian.
Yeah, not me.
Okay. Is anybody else getting the Zoom? If they're on Zoom a lot, they get the little emails with information on how to use the technology. I'm sure Miro does the same. I'm fairly new to Miro, but looking forward to learning more about it. But again, that's why I wanted to stay away from the technology stuff. There's heaps of people doing that, but actually, let's go back to the basics of meetings and then think about how do we take the human side and use the technology to enhance and embrace it.
Okay, how about if we end like the Beatles did on a high?
You're not going to sing.
No. It does mean that one of you has to get assassinated in a few years, but one of us three. So we'll flip a coin.
No, that was the fourth guy. He's already gone.
A three-sided coin.
A three-sided coin. I knew that would annoy someone. Okay. Hey, thank you, everyone. If you've got any thoughts or anything, just ping us. And toc.plus is actually there. And now, thanks to the wonder of technology, if you want to sign up, but you're probably already on the email list I used to notify. And that'll be fine. So Graham, I'm sort of going to just hand back to you and just say, why don't you do a countdown and then we'll wrap up and then I can get the recording up for everyone who couldn't attend.
Somebody just put their hand up and asked to be unmute. Can we just do that quickly before we do the countdown?
Hang on, where did I?
Can I just throw one more thing in? And
Please
maybe
do.
Yeah.
I missed it because I was late because of my time zone. One thing
Hi,
I
Clark.
really loved all the stuff you've presented. One thing that we have in our ground rules is kind of a level above, actually about sort of meetings themselves. And we have a bunch of things in there. One is we don't schedule a meeting that could be an email. And you're always free to leave a meeting where you're not contributing or receiving value. And you're always free to decline a meeting no matter what. So for each group, you'd want to work those out. But that's kind of even before you get into the meeting. And that actually helps to make meetings a lot more effective because now people have to think, why am I calling a meeting? Who do I really need? Things like that.
That's really good stuff, Terry. If you're going to build really good problem-solving meetings into an organization as a whole, then you do actually need a little bit more strategy around it. So we're only talking about what happens at a single meeting. But if you have, so for example, I worked with Air New Zealand, we had 98 problems, and which were all problem-solving things, right? So not only do we need to teach people how to problem solve, we actually needed to get some kind of strategy in order for those things, because if you solve one problem here and then you go over here and try and solve another one and they're prerequisites of each other, then that becomes a real challenge. So you're going to do this at an organizational level, much bigger task, much bigger task. But absolutely right, that would require possibly some kind of steering group or some kind of leadership about actually when do we use meetings, when do we not use meetings, that kind of stuff. Really, really valid point. I love it.
Another little tip on that, on top of Terry's idea, there is if you have experts that you know you're only going to need them for a few minutes in a 2-hour meeting, tell them to block out their time. We'll chat. We'll send you a chat. Can you come into the meeting now? And then you can go back. Oh, then an hour later we might need them back again. So just get them to block out that 2 hours,
Yeah.
but don't come to the
Yeah,
2-hour meeting.
Yeah, it's funny how many problem-solving sessions I've had, which suddenly we realised we didn't have the finance team involved, and we needed and we needed finance.
New Zealandian.
so
Hello.
where are we going? Okay, yes. So it's amazing how many times we've been in a situation where you suddenly realise you don't have the expertise and you need access to it. But when you've got multiple problem-solving sessions going on, often you find that there is a constraint or a bottleneck, Clark, in terms of the knowledge that's required, because that person is absolutely full on in terms of their capacity, right? So just being able to utilize them for a 15-minute component, but of course that requires the problem-solving team or the improvement team to be specific about their request and also specific about when they're going to hear that information. So that requires a lot more structure than just thinking about a straight out team meeting. But yeah, really, really valid stuff.
How about we do the mutual countdown? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. I'll speed it up. 3, 2, 1. Goodbye, everyone.
See ya.
Thank you for coming along.
Bye.
Thank you. It's beautiful.